Good morning. Today is the 13th of Kislev, the 26th of November.
And no Tachnun.
No Tachnun today because...
Chasna.
Nah, I don't think so.
Chasna tomorrow.
It's Chasna, maybe. In any case, what I did here was prepare a little bit of a summary of what we've seen so far, because this is... It's hard to keep track in the beginning of everything that's going on, right? So we started with a framework from Kabbalah about what Tzitz is. And then he said there's two necessary introductions that I have to tell you about. And they were the benefit of Torah, from Torah and Mitzvot to which end the soul descends to be embodied, why the soul is even interested. And the second was reward and punishment. And then we got into the question about whether the world to come is the afterlife, the world of souls, or whether it's the world of the resurrection, whether the final reward is spiritual or physical. And then he told us the second introduction requires an explanation about creation ex nihilo. You have to understand what all that is about. And then we explained that there are two different aspects or two different channels, we called it, of a creation. God's finite aspect creates the inner light, or pnimi, or hamamale, as it's called in the Zohar. And God's infinite aspect creates the surrounding light, or the or makif, or the Or Sovev. And then he gave us a parable for these two types of light, or revelations of life from God. They're two different things, from the brain and the body, and the communication between them. That was very similar to what we learned in the previous mimer. And so I said that, we have some problems and reservations about this example today, this parable, because we don't understand it the way that they did. We don't see it as instantaneous. So I gave two different modern parables. Not to say that they're better, but maybe they capture it better for some people. And that was non-locality in modern physics. We talked about entanglement and ER equals EPR, a little bit about that. And we mentioned the homunculus, which is how you pronounce it. I couldn't pronounce this word when I didn't look at it.
What was that again?
So here we have a representation of the brain, or at least half of a hemisphere. Right? This is part of a hemisphere. And what it shows you is how the different body parts are represented. So you see that the face is relatively very big. The hand is huge. Look at how big the hand is. It's like a quarter of the arc. You see the hand? All the way from the arm to the thumb, or from the wrist to the thumb is like as big as the face. There's so much that goes into that, into the hand. I didn't want to bring the other one. They have another picture of it where they do a person, like a figure of a person, with the body parts relative to their size in the brain's representation. And so you got this strange figure. It's very grotesque. He's got a very big head and huge hands, and everything else is tiny. It's like, but it's always done naked and it's grotesque. I didn't want to bring it. But this is one of the ways of seeing this. Okay, so this is where we are right now. At the end of last class, end of last week, I sort of gave a spoiler for everything that's going to happen. He's going to tell us that, not really everything is going to happen here. Here it's going to go in different directions. But I gave this connection that he didn't seem to make completely between the split, the divergence between philosophy and Kabbalah, and between the Rambam and the Ramban on this question of whether the world to come, which is it? Is it the afterlife, which would mean it's more or pnimi, it's more internalized, integrated light that has to do with the soul? Or is it like the Ramban says, Nachmanides, and Kabbalah went in this direction, that it has to be new light, it has to be something we haven't experienced yet, and he told us here that we don't experience the Sovev, we don't directly experience this makif, this surrounding light, and that is what will be revealed in the world of the resurrection. Okay, so where are we now? We are now I think we're about here, but כי קודם שחטא והנה האדם הראשון כתיב בו. Where are you? Are you in the right place? You see it? והנה האדם הראשון. Okay. והנה האדם הראשון. Man, Adam, כתיב בו, it says, ויניחהו בגן עדן לעובדה. God placed him in the Garden of Eden. What do we mean he placed him in the Garden of Eden? Ki kodem shechatay Gan Eden. What? To work. Meaning that there was a full existence there, which included what we call mitzvos at some level. He had commandments at some level. Because before Adam ate from the tree of knowledge, Gan Eden was the end of all creation. There wasn't anything underneath it. There wasn't anything lower. This was the end and the goal of all of the evolution of the world. Everything that God set into motion when He created the world, it ended with the Garden of Eden. This was reality. B'madrigat olam hashafel, in the lower world. That's all there is. Asher tmurat ze ata olam hazeh mechamat hachet sheyardu olamot. But after he sinned, after he ate from the tree of knowledge, it was like a trap door opened. Well, there wasn't anything really there, so the trap door is a bad image. But suddenly there had to be created even lower realms into which he inhabited. Now, what does this all mean? It doesn't mean, like some people mistakenly think, that Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, was something spiritual. It wasn't physical. That is not correct. There was a physical dimension, the same physical dimension we know, except that it was on a higher spiritual plane. Spiritually, it was at a higher level, but it was still the same world that we understand. Adam was made the same way that we are. The sages, and again, this is a very common mistake by even you hear the great, most popular rabbis on YouTube. They don't get this right for some reason, even though it's explained in many places. The fact that the sages tell us he was 100 cubits high, that his heel was brighter than the sun, many superlatives comparing him to this, comparing him to that, is not a statement about physical reality. These are metaphors. They're meant to be understood as metaphors. Meaning, spiritually, if he looked at his soul, what he could perceive, what he could gather, what he could know about himself, it was that he was like 100 cubits high. And that's it's metaphor for something. What is it? That he was living in what we call, spiritually, 100 is always related to the world of creation. So he sees underneath him 100 cubits. So he's living in the world of emanation, and underneath him are 100 cubits. That's the way it's explained in Kabbalah. It's a metaphor. It's not meant to be understood literally. That his heel is like the sun. Okay, so the sun, there's nothing new, right? Nothing new under the sun, says Ecclesiastes. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that, the only place that there's anything new is above the sun. What exactly would that even mean today? It's not a physical description. It's saying that if you want to discuss any kind of innovation, true innovation, not just something from something, but rather something from nothing, like we explained here, it's called above the sun. So when we say that Adam's heel was brighter than the sun, we mean to say that he's above the sun. That's what we mean. That's what that metaphor is alluding to, and that's what you need to understand. So it wasn't that he didn't have a physical body like we have. It was all the same, except that spiritually he was in the world of emanation, and because he was in the world of emanation, everything that's underneath that is lower than him. What happened when we say that suddenly new realms were created? We don't mean, God forbid, that some other world was created. No, it's still the same world. It's exactly the same world, just lower spiritual levels. He descended into lower spiritual levels until he came down to what we call now the world of action. Because in his world, in the spiritual world that he inhabited, mitzvos did not mean creating a tzitzik like we understand tzitzik. He did it in a more spiritual sense. By the way, the final descent into the spiritual world still took time even after he was banished from the Garden of Eden. It didn't happen immediately. It was like a process. It took 130 years, 200 years, 1,000 years, who knows? It took time until he got accustomed to the new reality that he was in. Okay? So that's what happened then. But in Garden of Eden, when he was there before the sin, he was serving God. כדרך שאנחנו עובדים בעולם הזה כדי לקבל שכר. He was serving God in the same way that we serve God, except again, his actions were not of our types of actions. It wasn't making tefillin, making tzitzit. Apparently, just by not eating from the tree of knowledge, he performed the equivalent of all the prohibitory mitzvot that we have, all the 365. By eating, enjoying himself from the trees that he was allowed to eat from, he was performing all the 248 positive, prescriptive mitzvot that we have. That's how it was. So where was he spiritually? So spiritually, again, the way that you almost can't unsee it. There was a book written by an Israeli whose name is Harari. Yuval Noach Harari. He's got a million problems about him. But his biggest problem is that he tries to rewrite what scientists call history of what they call the early sapiens, the early, what they think existed 1,000,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, whatever. He tries to somehow coordinate this with the Bible. He tries to really his subtext.
American?
No, he's Israeli.
Okay, this is someone different.
Don't read his book. Save yourself the problem.
Okay.
The subtext is the Bible is a beautiful story, and if you just reinterpret it in some way, you can come up with something similar to what scientists do, which is a nice attempt. He has no knowledge of Torah. He has no knowledge of anything that has to do with Torah, and so his attempt to thread it together just doesn't work. In this sense, we see Adam as being more spiritual than we are, not less. He wants to say that Adam is like the caveman. So he was completely not spiritual. Now we'll tell you, yeah, ancient cultures were more spiritual, more connected to nature. That's true in some sense. But that's not the point. The point is he was more spiritual, even in, like he says now, his understanding of the Shekhinah, of the divine presence. I came across a new definition. I saw it yesterday and I liked it a lot, from Max Weber. I unfortunately have to admit that I didn't pay attention in class when we studied Max Weber, which was a big loss. I should reread him now. And he has a beautiful statement, or a beautiful word that he uses to describe a lot of the things that we're describing. He calls it enchantment. What does it mean to be enchanted? It's like you British say, charmed, I'm sure, right? Charmed, enchanted. What does it mean? I'm enthralled. I'm taken in by it. That's not a bad word for explaining what we mean when we say that the divine presence was clear and present to Adam and to the generation, for instance, the generations when the temple stood in Jerusalem. You felt that the world was enchanted, but enchanted sort of means is like, again, going back to spirits and all kinds of strange things. Enchanted really should mean, it's a way to say very nicely that the world was full of God's presence. People felt it. They could cut the air with it. And when you imagine, even if you read just a little bit of history, you know that people used to believe in dragons and in this and that. What is all that? The world was more enchanted. What exactly that enchantment was, if you were a non-Jew living all kinds of mythologies and this and that, so the world was full of still gods or dragons or whatever else. If you were learning Torah and you were learning Kabbalah, or you were learning Merkava mysticism, whatever it was, the world was enchanted. It was full of God's presence. If you visited the temple, you came back with an understanding. People from all over the world came to experience the temple. You came back with an experience of godliness in the world, not dragons and sleeping princesses. It's a very important distinction, but it's not a bad word to use, meaning you were enchanted by godliness. You felt that everything was full of godliness. So Adam, was very cognizant of this divine presence and everything. Even though he wasn't doing mitzvahs, he wasn't davening, he wasn't doing any of these things. He wasn't keeping Shabbos, that wasn't his thing. but everything was full of godliness. He looked at the tree. It could be that he even saw the beginnings of what we will later call the first 3 years that you can't eat from it, and then the bikurim that you're supposed to make. He could maybe even see this in some way, which we can't. We have to take from the Torah itself. ואם כן נמצא שלאחר החטא, שירדו עולמות, נעשה בחינת עשיית האדם ראשון, שכר ועונג אלינו. And so, when he descended, after he ate from the tree of knowledge, and he descended spiritually, then we call it the descent of the worlds. In the result, the worlds descended 14 levels. It doesn't matter. He goes very deeply into this whole discussion. And what he called action for him, which was taking a fruit off the tree, and everything, all the godliness that he felt in that act, that he experienced in that act, we call it the Garden of Eden. That for us became the Garden of Eden. What does it mean it became the Garden of Eden? When we imagine understanding godliness at the highest level, which is impossible to do when we're alive, only after we pass away, in the afterlife, in the Garden of Eden, then we grasp what he grasped by the simple act of taking a fruit over a tree, off a tree, and eating it. Okay? That's what we're looking for. So we'll continue tomorrow because he wants to start the...